for the second day. So let's start with this morning. I'm Marliese Truter, and I'm from the South African Institute for Aquatic Biodiversity. So I'll be representing in person, and then we have some colleagues joining us online. Also, welcome to our online attendees connected from various regions across the country. This is the Science for Society lecture that is co-hosted by the NRF-SAEON, SAEON, as well as the Northwest University. And thank you for the annual conference of the South African Society for Atmospheric Sciences for accommodating us to host this lecture as part of your conference. We really appreciate it. The NRF celebrating a major milestone in its history as it commemorates its 25th anniversary since its establishment on the 1st of April in 1999 as a statutory body mandated to promote and support research in South Africa and to reflect on its contribution to the science system. The NRF and its national facilities are holding a number of events during the 2024 and 2025 financial year in honor of its quarter century of impact as South Africa's #1 or premier science council. So the Science for Society lecture forms part of the celebration of the events that showcases the impact of the NRF on society under the theme Celebrating Innovation Through Research and Partnerships. And we'll kick off with Prof. Sue from the NRF-SAEON Grassland Node. Thank you.
Thank you very much. One correction, I'm not a prof, I'm not even a doctor. But thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you so much for hosting us. It's my first SASAS conference, and I've learned a lot. And the most important thing I heard yesterday was from Francois. Aha, there we go. Is this on my presentation? Arrow's not working. So yesterday, and I do think this is the most important statement, Francois said, uptake of our science is where we are most lacking. So despite all the science you're doing, if it's not taken up or it doesn't have impact, some people may say, what's the point in doing it? Of course, it is a lot of fun. But if you share this feeling with Francois, you might be feeling a little bit like this, or maybe like this. You're looking for this and want to be a part of bridging the gap. I certainly hope you're not trying to do this, because if you try and have impact going it alone, I think you're going to fall off, which is why I really appreciated Hector's comment yesterday. And I heard you, Hector, when you said, we need to have a conversation. So knowledge for societal impact. Anybody who produces knowledge that has bearing on South Africa's scarce water sources has the potential to have impact on lives, livelihoods, and the economy of the country. But as Francois alluded to, there seems to be this gap between our knowledge and what we see playing out on the ground. And this is something that's worried me for a long time. And in all our work that we're doing with SAEON in the Maputaland coastal plain, we've been trying to address this and sort of grapple with how we can improve our impact on the ground. So let me take you on a journey to Maputaland. Somebody asked me yesterday, where is Maputaland? Well, it's in the far northeastern corner of KZN. If you look at the weather forecast, they don't have weather there because there's never anything there. And this area is really a microcosm of all the wicked problems that we face in the world, particularly those facing rural areas. This is one of the poorest regions in South Africa. It's got nutrient-poor soils, very poor agricultural potential. But there's a twist to this area in that if you look carefully, you'll see that it has no surface rivers running into the area. So it's an entirely groundwater dependent system. There's no bulk water infrastructure supplying water to that system. And the whole area is dependent on that groundwater resource, which is dependent on rainfall for recharge, which makes it obviously a climate sensitive region. To excite the climatologists in the area, it's also on the transition zone between the tropical and the subtropical zones. So you should all get very excited and come and do some research there. And it's also host to South Africa's largest freshwater lake, which is Lake Sibaya. Anybody been there? One, Hector, great. So you know how beautiful it is. Okay, really, really beautiful. And also the Cozy Bay Lake system, it really is a stunning, stunning landscape. I always say to the students we work with, choose your office wisely. So as I said, it's a groundwater dependent ecosystem. And because of the nutrient poor soils, the people living in the area are very dependent on these groundwater ecosystems as well as the groundwater for their water. So yeah, if anything happens to these, it really affects people's lives and livelihoods. So as you could guess, there is an issue there. This is a graph of water levels of Lake Sabaya. Now, Lake Sabaya is essentially an expression of the groundwater table in the area. And water levels started declining in around 2000, quite dramatically to lowest on record. And eventually by 2016, it had breached what we call in hydrology, I'm not a hydrologist, but they call it the ecological drought reserve, which is set by the Department of Water Affairs and Sanitation. This means if the municipality wants water to supply for human consumption more than it's already abstracting and needs a license, technically they can't give them a license. There's no allocable water left in that system. So it really is a big problem. This also has consequences for ecosystems. And remember, people rely on these ecosystems. This is an aerial photograph of Vazipan in 1942. It's a peatland, 7,000 years old, and peatlands, to form peat, need to stay wet, and that should tell you something about the system. We can document the changes in land use around the system. We can understand the ecosystem services, and we can document how the systems degrade. I was there that day. And that's when you really ask yourself, is any of the work we're doing enough to stop this kind of devastation into the future? And some people will say, well, that depends on the drivers. So some people believe, oh, it's the eucalyptus plantations causing the problem. And there's a lot of hoo-ha about that. Other people say, it's just a long drought. Some people like me say, well, what's climate change doing here? And all of those perspectives actually are correct. There's evidence for eucalyptus having an impact. There's also evidence for below average rainfall in that area. So the solution is simple. Just take out the eucalyptus trees and the water table will be okay. There might be some worry about the climate, but we can't change the climate, certainly not in that area. So the best adaptation response is take out the eucs, but instead of them being taken out, they've doubled. So in the last 2 decades, there's been a doubling of eucalyptus plantations in that area. So what's going on here? And essentially what we're missing is the human dimension. This is Nduna Tembe, who I met in 2016 after the Vazi fire. And he explained to us quite clearly and simply, everybody in this area knows that the eucalyptus take water. They call them amagam in that area. That it's a source of livelihood for many people there. And now you've come and explained climate change. We hadn't heard of it really before. We didn't think it would affect us. And we are really worried about our water resources, even before we heard about climate change. And then he posed this challenge. Can you give me an alternative economic livelihood that will help protect our water resources and make sure in this changing climate thing that you guys are talking about, it's not going to actually cause more damage than the eucalyptus trees? I couldn't give him an answer. So that's when I realized, okay, we need to bring the human dimension into our work, including economics, which is something I'm terrified of. So I was very, very fortunate. We managed to get a very brave bunch of collaborators together and got money from the WRC. Chris Reason is sitting in the conference today. So he was one of our collaborators. He was our climatologist. We had 3 hydrologists. We had a resource economist, James Bluchner from Asset. And together, we really delved into this black box, which everybody calls multidisciplinary integration. What does it really mean? And we really wanted to get this right and start the integration up front. And we had a number of students and interns who were helping us, and everybody played a significant role in this project. So thanks to the WRC for the funding. And we wanted to root the work in the traditional council area with the people on the ground. Clearly, the top-down approach wasn't working, so we wanted a bottom-up approach. So we started asking the traditional councils, what are your key challenges, and what do you think are the most important economic activities happening in this area? And we also did quite a large socioeconomic survey, 217 household surveys. Hector, you know the area, you can imagine how long that took. And then from the modeling perspective, we took a really novel approach because what we wanted is to have a hydrological model that could capture the actual change in land use over time and the actual climate on those land uses over time. So we need a gridded approach with the gridded climate data showing the spatio-temporal variability of climate and land use over time in that region. And then from there, we put that into a surface model called ACRU, and that produces something called the recharge, which was put into the groundwater model, which was ModFlow for those interested. And once all the modeling was right and we felt we were simulating the status quo well, we did an experiment and we ripped out all the forestry and replaced it with grasslands. That's from past to present to see what happened. And while that was going on, Chris and Ross and his colleagues were doing an analysis of the climate from past to present. And we also did loads of field work with the students collecting isotope samples with rainfall, groundwater in the lake to try and understand the aquifer dynamics. So some quick snapshot results. Water security was overwhelmingly the #1 challenge everybody brought up in the household surveys and in the traditional council workshops. Unemployment, or the lack of employment, was the other one. And then the income status and issues related to not research infrastructure, that's growing, but infrastructure within the areas. And there were a lot of concerns about the degradation of natural resources in the area, particularly the loss of grasslands, the increase in bush encroachment, and just invasive species. They brought out a lot of issues they were concerned about, and the cattle farmers in particular were really worried. So from some of the nice instruments we have, thank you, Esrig, we were able to measure that the eucalyptus plantations had the highest evapotranspiration of all the land uses we looked at. That means they use more water than any of the other land uses. Whereas grasslands were the best for recharging the groundwater. So where rainfall falls on grasslands, more of that water reaches the groundwater table. So grasslands are cool. Please don't plant trees in them. From Ross and Chris's group, they were able to demonstrate that up till 2018, there was definitely below average rainfall since that 2000 period. But more interestingly, they found that there had been very few extreme rainfall events. And that became exciting when we looked at the isotope data, which showed that you need rainfall events of over 30 mils to have, to have any impact on the recharge in the groundwater table. So that was a really exciting result. And our weather station data, what you're looking at here, the blue bars is our rainfall data. So that's our actual in-situ data. And this is just a paired set of wells where you can see where these big rainfall events, you're certainly seeing a peak in the groundwater response. So what this taught us is the importance not just of the amount of rainfall, but the characteristics of the rainfall on a daily basis. Okay, so when we did the simulations for the lake level, this is Lake Sabaya lake level simulated. The red is the status quo. The blue is the no forestry scenario. So the decline in both clearly shows that there isn't a dominant climate impact in that area. But the results also showed the system would not have breached the drought reserve had plantations never been planted in that area. So that catalyzed a lot of degradation. And from the surveys that we did, the benefits of forestry certainly didn't outweigh the negative impacts. And more so, there was very little evidence of financial gain and employment from the forestry industry at the household level. So few people were benefiting at the expense of many. So to have that data is quite powerful. So now the fun part, looking into the future, at the council workshops, we gave them a magic wand and they said, if you could change this, do anything. We gave them carte blanche, think of anything. And then from that, the idea was to distill a number of scenarios that we would rip out half of the formal forestry block, replace it with what the community came up with, run that under a warmer, wetter climate storyline and a warmer, drier future climate storyline up to 2050 in the lifespan of people. Put it through the hydrological models, look at the impact on the water resource. But then the key thing was integrating this into a systems model, which is a resource economics model, which had all sorts of things like crop coefficients, bed nights in tourism operations, the profitability of the different options chosen, and all those sorts of things. And the key that we wanted to look at was whether the choices made, the aspirations, these things, did they have a positive or a negative impact holistically on these challenges that the community had identified? So we ran a number of scenarios. If any of you understand this process, that's quite a big achievement. But I'll only just now talk to what we would call the control. First, we had to construct a future climate, and this is where things got tricky, and I had nothing to do with this. I just watched the process, but they chose CMIP6 models, and we thought this was going to be great. We'll get wet ones, and we'll get dry ones, and, you know, we'll create these future storylines. But then Michelle said to us, well, actually, I need them on a daily time step for the hydrological model. I need daily Tmax, Tmin, and daily rainfall. So that reduced the number of models we could use. The bottom line is the ones we used in the end, there wasn't actually that much difference between them because there were very few to choose from. And then they did this thing called a bias correction. And then the hydrologists ran it through the model, and then they gave me the results, and literally this was my reaction. I'm like, I cannot take this back to the community, and you'll see why shortly. So then I started asking questions like, how do you do these bias correction things, you know? And I'm still not convinced I really understand, but my concern was perhaps it was because we had used a period where there had actually been below average rainfall and there were very few extreme events. So I asked the team very nicely, because they were getting very shirty with me, please can you go back and try something else? So they then looked at the NRF-5 data. And I said, you know, look at the wet period. I know the 70s was really wet, so do something there. So they took that, they added 10%, really simple, and they did the same for a dry period. But you'll notice even using the NRF-5 data in January, February, March, which is when we have these extreme rainfall events, the blue bar is observed data, and the gray is the NRF-5 data. It's still underestimating these extreme rainfall events. So just take note of that. So yeah, we ran these 4 future storylines, but I'm only going to present 3 because the last one is very similar to the CMIP6 dry. And this is what it looks like. So yeah, there was where I had my panic attack. And essentially under those futures with that CMIP6 storyline, those CMIP6 storylines, the system essentially collapses. There was a recovery with the NRF-5 dry periods where we have high rainfall and a large number of extreme rainfall events. But even still, after about 2050, the system hadn't recovered. I can sneak preview that if the forestry hadn't been there, it does get there. So yeah, forestry is really bad for this area. So my question is, are these plausible future storylines? I'm not really sure. I think they might be, but that's where we need your help. So what we learned was the water resources in this area are very responsive to rainfall, obviously. And it's not only the amount, but the characteristics of the rainfall that are important. And they drive the hydrological response. And the hydrological response is not proportional to the change in rainfall. So small inaccuracies in the modeled rainfall data that we put in there on a daily time step have big influences on the water resource. So it's important that we get these right. And it's just as important for the historical data because we use that to benchmark the hydrological models to see what's going on. And of course, obviously, land cover has an impact, and the bush encroachment and the forestry scenario together, where we didn't take out any forestry, that had the worst outcome. I can't go into all the other results. So you ask, well, okay, you've done all this stuff, but has it actually made a difference? Has it had an impact? Is there uptake? Now, you can't, in my view, measure impact, but you can look at some of the outcomes. And I'll just share a few with you. I've come up with this theory that the more oh bugger moments you have, the better you learn and the more you know and you're really doing integration, because we had a lot of oh bugger moments. So we really tussled and went to and forth to get this right. And we also identified a number of emergent opportunities, one of which was the community were really interested in commercializing cattle. Now, we saw this and we saw some of their constraints to it. I knew of a good group that are doing fantastic work in Matatiele with the Meet Naturally program. So we thought, oh, well, let's do a knowledge exchange. And we took 9 members of the community to Matatiele for them to learn. They weren't learning from us, they were learning from their peers. They've come back as ambassadors for good land use planning, good governance, and finding solutions to our own problems. That wasn't us telling them that. That's just a feature of us being in the landscape and filling a gap. They came up with some feasible options like marula. It looks like a feasible option. It might actually be profitable and it's a very climate resilient species, but we need implementers to help us test their ideas in the field. And Dr. Myeni, wherever you are, that's why I need you and your smart agriculture to help us. So we also were able to profile the results, and with a bit of the shaking of the tree, I'll be engaging with the forestry sector next month. So good luck. So to end with, what are some of the success factors for impact? Everybody's going to tell you to try and measure it. I don't think you can, but you can plan for impact. Collaborate across your fields, obviously. You need good facilitators. They don't need to be experts. We use people in our team, draw on the diversity in our country. We've got amazing people, harness that diversity. Learn to listen, and learn to listen when people don't understand you. When you're working with big people from different disciplines, they often talk past each other. And sometimes you need to be an idiot like me to ask silly questions. You need time, so the funders need to take care of that. And you have to care enough to connect the dots. And if you can't do that, work with somebody who does. And the SAEON network is open to help you with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. I'll take Sue's mic. We have time for one question from the floor.
Thank you so much. That was really interesting. In terms of the economic impact, have you looked into if you have to remove the eucalyptus trees and replace them, for instance, with marula? Does it have a great economic impact with replacing, and does that impact your work also quite a bit?
Yeah, so the economic model we developed, our first priority was to get the conceptualization of the model right. We've got the marula in there. The trouble is there's very little data to parameterize the model on marula. But my sense is if we continue building on that and parameterizing the model, that it would land up being more profitable than the eucalyptus, because with eucalyptus, you only get a harvest every 7 to 8 years. With marula, you'll be getting a harvest every year, and you can also use your natural population. So people who don't have access to plantations, they can do wild harvesting, and it's the oil from the marula that's got a very, very high value. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Sue. And that's all that we have time for now. So we'll move right into the panel discussion. So can I please ask the panelists to move to the front?
Wat wil je doen? We willen vertellen bij kan. Wat van dan toe kan. Ek sal jy gaan aan as jy ry.
All right, panelists, are you ready? Yes, you can sit. I will stand. I'll be running around. So we'll have Professor Albert Chakona and Professor Francesca Porri joining us online. And then Prof. Francois, Dr. Mary Jane, Dr. Warren, and Dr. Paolo will be in the room with us. Thank you for joining us today. So we'll start off with each of the panelists. Please introduce yourself and a short overview of the research that you focus on. We can start with you, Mary Jane.
Okay, thank you, Marliese. Good morning, everybody. I am Mary Jane Bopape. I am the Managing Director of the South African Environmental Observation Network, which is one of the national facilities of the NRF. I think first is just to thank SASAS EXCO, SASAS Local Organizing Committee, Northwest University for giving us an opportunity to have this lecture here. I'll speak a bit more about what we do at SAEON, but as the name says, we are monitoring the environment, and you've just seen some of the nice work we are doing, working with the local communities from Sue's presentation.
Good morning, Paola Formentii. I'm a scientist at the National Center for Scientific Research in France, and I work next to Paris, in a research unit next to Paris, on atmospheric aerosols.
Morning, everyone. I'm Francois Engelbrech, the climate modeler. My research has always focused on climate change futures in Africa. As you know, I also currently serve as president of our beloved organization, and looking forward to the last day of deliberations.
Thanks, Francois. Hi, everybody. My name is Warren Joubert. I'm with SAEON at the moment. My background is observations, particularly of atmospheric composition. But prior to doing that, I was involved in ocean, atmosphere, carbon exchange fluxes, and now trying to see how one can apply those exchanges that one sees between the ocean and the atmosphere in a terrestrial observational space. So that's currently the research that I'm focusing on.
Thank you.
Do I keep the mic? No.
Yes. You have a few seconds. Are you good?
No.
Okay. So then I will jump right into a few questions. The first one. Apologies, Francesca and Albert. Would the two of you please proceed? Albert, I think let's start with you.
Okay, thanks, Marliese. Good morning, everyone. My name is Albert Chakona. I'm currently the acting managing director for the NRF-SAEAB, which stands for the South African Institute for Aquatic Biodiversity. My research interests are in fish taxonomy, systematics, biogeography, and conservation. We undertake research in freshwater systems across Southern Africa, but we also have active collaborations in East and Central Africa. And briefly, for SAEAB, we host the largest and diverse platforms for undertaking aquatic biodiversity research on the African continent. So this includes freshwater, estuarine, and also marine systems. Thank you.
They said you want something that I don't have. What did you take me?
Morning, everyone. Please, Dina, can you please mute yourself? Thank you. Hello, everyone. Good morning, everyone. I'm Francesca Porri. I'm a colleague of Albert. I'm also based as a senior scientist at SAEAB. I am a marine biologist by training, focusing on coastal environments. And in recent years, I've dedicated myself and the research that I do to address biodiversity and ecosystem functioning in urbanized coastal areas, such as harbors, seawalls, marinas, waterfront. And together with the team, the Coastal and Ocean Sciences team, we seek and explore solutions or possible solutions that to enhance the ecological integrity of this built environment from a biodiversity angle. Looking forward to this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesca. So we will jump into a question. We will start with Mary Jane, following on Sue's intriguing presentation. Mary Jane, can you tell us, how do you see the role of long-term environmental observation networks like SAEON in helping the societies to adapt to current and future climate change challenges?
Okay, thanks for that really good question. I think first of all, I'll just start by saying, so what Sue showed is an example of one of the landscapes that we have. So we have a number of them across the country. SAEON has 4 terrestrial nodes, and each of these nodes have landscapes that are responsible for where we are collecting meteorological data, hydrology data. We are also observing how the landscapes or the biomes, for example, are changing because of climate change. We also have two marine nodes, Elwandle node based in Pietermaritzburg, and in Cape Town, we have eGagasini node that are collecting ocean observations. So the point is that we right now, we can't say climate change is happening if we do not have the data to prove it. So it is through the data that we collect, analyze, that we can say that climate change is happening because of that data that provides that information. We analyze it, then we get the information from the data. We can use that data to inform the development of satellite products. So as you know, we can't put observations everywhere, in South Africa. So we do need some in-situ observations to be able to calibrate those satellite products. And even in the development of models, we require data, because models, when you run a model operationally, you need input that tells you this is the state of the environment at the moment, and then so that you are able to forecast going forward. And secondly, as we develop these models, we need the data sets to be able to verify these models. And the other thing is also that to represent processes, you need to know what those processes look like. So the types of long-term data sets that we are collecting within SAEON can assist, with just basically with a number of things.
Thank you, Mary Jane. Are there any questions from the floor for Mary Jane? Okay, then I will continue. Paolo, I have a question for you. Following on your work that you have been doing over the past decade, what challenges have you faced in creating sustainable partnerships and ensuring that both the research and the impacts continue to benefit African sciences and communities in the long term?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm not very fresh this morning after last night, but I prepared a little bit anyhow. So what I wanted to say, first of all, I think that collaborative science is crucial. We cannot do without, particularly when people try to do science somewhere else, far away from their environment. We need really to interact with people that know the environment, they know the climate, and our atmospheric sciences here, we know the climate, the environment, and the ecosystems. Otherwise, it's just pointless. I would also say that it's important to show a model for society, because the way that we can collaborate in science without boundaries, basically, should be explained to and transposed to society. So I think we have a double role there. We have to really think that what we try to do is important. The challenges. So the challenges, in my opinion, there are two families. There are some which are, but the most important are related to the perception. What we think about each other. I think there is a really, a first barrier is the fact that when going south, that people think that, the poor come to work with the rich come to work with the poor. Rich in knowledge, rich in funding, in possibilities, and that's not true. It's not true in both sense. I mean, I think this kind of partnership. Let me call them north-south just to simplify. I'm not saying that could be east-west, but there's no rich or poor because we're facing the same challenges. Funding is a challenge in France, for example, a different level, different ways, but still is a challenge. And again, as I said, we don't have the same knowledge. So, we have to go beyond that perception. Then there are some, I would call them technical barriers. One is the language. For us, we are, I'm Italian, French-based. So, you go to another country, you have to speak, in this case, English, sometimes, or vice versa. Time availability, need time to construct a collaboration. The distance can be a problem. And now the distance is not only a problem to actually pursue the research, but is also a challenge because it has to be put into balance with the necessity of reducing our carbon budget. So, it's a bit of a moral dilemma that we have there, because I think we have to go and beyond these distances. So in my opinion, the solution, again, I try to be brief. One is to be, the real solution is to build a trust over time and to show respect. So, you know, there's no, as I said, there is no poor, rich, or knowledgeable, not knowledgeable. So you have to actually spend time to understand how the other people function, psychologically, practically. One very, how can I say, arrogant way when we come. Well, I know, I've been like that. I mean, you know, we think that we want answers now, and as if, you know, other people did not have commitments or like, you know, their schedule. So, you know, really show respect about the science and the timing. Practically, again, I think calling on the phone is much better than sending emails and doing Zoom calls. Sometimes, you know, connections are not good. So WhatsApp is actually an incredible tool for, you know, building this kind of collaboration. I must admit, for me, it works very well. Involve authorities. So using the science, using the diplomats. You know, all the embassies have services for facilitating and accompanying and explaining how the, you know, the science system works in the other countries. Sometimes, for example, my institutions and offices, so I try always to get involved with them so that I try to understand how other countries work. And then, of course, is the funding. So we don't have unlimited funding, but clearly one of the solutions is really to try and leverage money so that we can involve and, you know, really make the science collaborative. And in this last project we struggled in Namibia for a very long time to involve students. And in this last project we have it now, we managed to have scholarship for master's students. And I see that immediately, you know, there is an anchorage. There is something that becomes real. And so I would say that that's the ultimate goal. So we have to create frameworks for, you know, also for exchanging funding and yeah, and benefiting from them.
Thank you.
Yeah, hope it answered the question.
Is there anyone from the audience that would like to contribute or have a question regarding this approach and the challenges, any challenges that you're experiencing or successes in collaborative research?
Thanks. So we're being pushed more and more, which I'm grateful for, to do more engaged research. What is your perspective? We often asked to put in these funding proposals and you need to almost have all the outcomes already figured out. But if you really want to do engaged research, you need to engage your end users and your stakeholders first. What would you recommend to our funders, and I come from the NRF, as something that could help overcome that barrier? Thanks.
Yeah, again, so that's something I cannot make recommendation because I must admit I don't really know deeply how the system works here. And but we were talking, we have a collaborative program that is called ARSAIO. It's on atmospheric sciences. It's between France and South Africa, and is sponsored by CNRS in France and NRF. And now, for example, NRF is not funding that the South African part since I think 2 years. So we have been talking about that. How do we solve this situation? And we get very little money, but I mean, I used it to come here now. Yeah? And so how do we make the reciprocal working again? So I know what I can do when I'm in France. You know, I know that I can write to managers, the manager of CNRS and my division. I can write and can make appointment. I can try and leverage the case. And then is their role I think, to go and discuss with the counterpart at NRF because the frameworks are there. So I think I don't know if that is an habit, it can be done in South Africa, I think. But I would say that that's the way of, you know, doing it. Don't try to be, I mean, we cannot try and be the diplomats, but we can use the ones that are able to. But clearly this, you know, framework are very important, very important.
Francesca had a comment for you online, Paola. She says, sharing a lot of points with Paolo, especially for the building of long-term trust, respect, and real time to spend with communities and collaborators to ensure that these partnerships are truly tangible. Not a question, rather an agreed comment. Thank you, Francesca. We'll jump right over to you. With the coastal and ocean research team that you are driving in Makanda, you've adopted a lot of transdisciplinary approaches in your research. Your team is pioneering transdisciplinary research. Can you share a case study where the collaborative work has led to a tangible outcome for coastal ecosystems in urban habitats?
Sure. I'm not sure if I've got enough time though, but I will share it very happily because our current project is truly disciplinary. It targets, the whole title is Indigenous Marine Innovation for Sustainable Environments and Economies. And the problems is targeting ports and trying to enhance, rehabilitate the natural biodiversity in ports through a partnership with local communities to retrofit, co-create structures made out of a plant material locally known as imizi, or the scientific term is of the plant is Cyperus textilis. And these structures are retrofitted onto the seawalls of harbors and pontoons and piers. And this is why, because when we build harbors, when we build seawalls as a reflection of sea level rises, the cementification of these infrastructures lacks of that structural complexity that is otherwise needed for life, for marine coastal life to occur. So through this partnership with the local communities, through this weaving of these prototypes that are retrofitted, we complexify the seawalls. And so this is number one, interaction and partnership with the local community in the Eastern Cape through the Kaiskama Trust. I would just stretch a little long onto the partnerships also with the arts from an academic point of view with Rhodes University and the ecomusicology department, because and we believe that this partnership and strengthen the outcomes of the project, because by collaborating with the indigenous knowledge holders and integrating the music, we believe that we strengthen coastal conservation efforts and at the same time empower the community involved. We often say that we find the music to be the unifying language that help us understand and communicate better with communities and with the outside stakeholder. So this is like in a nutshell what I would say. Also in terms of how this relationship has worked, I really need to underline that all of the points that Paola has made, because we needed time to build the trust with the community. We needed real time to travel regularly to the community, not through Zoom emails or even WhatsApp messages. It doesn't really work. You need to be present and work with the community to define, address, design alteration to these structures that we developed. And the only problem is that what next? Because my usual point of challenge for this type of projects is that, and transdisciplinary research, is that you build the trust and the project ends as usually through a structure of 3 years type of funding. So we currently seeking ways of ensuring that this relationship and this partnership continues, but it is a challenge. And I just forgot to add that in this multi or transdisciplinary relationship, I could not mention also the partnership with the industry, public Transnet through the ports, but also private sector through the Port of St. Francis and the Port Alfred Marina. So we've got almost like a triangle between academia, rural communities and industries. And so far from a concept proof, it has worked, although we have encountered the obvious challenges that I've just mentioned. Thank you. I'm happy to stop here and take some questions or take it over, but I want to leave time to the other speakers as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesca. Any questions from the floor? All right. Francesca, I maybe have a short question. Do you have any ideas on how to extend the lifespan of this community interaction after the project has ended? Did you have any ideas that you would like to explore in the future?
Well, we have in the way what we think we have applied for additional fundings in different sources, and we're waiting for the outcome with the community still involved in an original, innovative ways, and still maintaining the strong input from a techno blending of the practices of the indigenous practices in designing solutions for the coastal environment. We also, the preliminary results, this project is still ongoing, but preliminary results are indeed promising. So we are in touch with some international collaborators that would like to work more on this topic, on this nature-based indigenous knowledge link. So we are in any way we can. We are trying to maintain this partnership alive. And so, yeah, this is where we are. I can tell you in about a month or two if we get some fundings to continue.
Thank you. We'll move on to Warren. Warren, given the growing importance of monitoring terrestrial landscapes, what are the key findings so far from the FTON program in terms of biodiversity and socio-ecological research?
From a key findings perspective, because the FTON program has only very recently been initiated, we don't have that much to sort of have definite or to say in a definitive way that this is actually what our current finding is. But what I would actually like to sort of reframe this sort of question is just to share with everybody actually what the FTON program does. And the idea basically behind it was to set up a community-based, and when I say community-based, it was the research community got together and had a discussion about, so how do we actually start monitoring over the long term what's happening from a terrestrial perspective in terms of gas exchange fluxes, in terms of what the biodiversity changes, the land use changes are doing, what the atmosphere is doing in terms of, you know, the various landscapes around South Africa. So the community got together and said, okay, we want to focus on the important themes, the atmosphere, the biodiversity, the socio-ecological systems aspect. So how do you, that the ecology is not necessarily separated from society in a sense, you know? So humans have impact on what the environment does. And in the same way, the environment actually impacts on how we behave, how we socialize, how we live. And so we have 5 of these themes in the FTON program. And in each of these themes, having a dedicated sort of long-term ambition to say, you know, let's, from an atmospheric perspective, look at what the atmospheric composition is doing in the variety of landscapes that we have around South Africa. So it was strategically placed in areas where the landscapes around South Africa is actually, it's the different biomes, I would say. Fynbos in the Western Cape, or the Karoo in the central of South Africa, the grasslands on the East Coast, not coast. And so our ambition is actually from an early stage in all of these aspects to try and understand over the long term from a community perspective, what are the, you know, how the environment is actually behaving and changing over time. Cool.
Thank you, Warren. Any contribution from the audience? Questions, thoughts? So have you had any feedback from the communities and how this type of research contribute to their livelihoods or social activities?
Yeah, from a livelihoods perspective, so there's continuously engagement with a variety of communities. If we take the Maputoland coastal plains, there's on a weekly basis, our socio-ecological group is basically reaching out to communities, engaging with what the priorities are for that community, from how the environment is affecting them, how weather conditions in that area, how the droughts, for instance, or the water resources that they are dependent on for subsistence, how that is continuously being monitored, and, so that people have an understanding of exactly what those things are. A different example so our Cape Town landscape, the Greater Cape Town landscape, for instance, is also quite new in its development in terms of how we are establishing it. However, what we've noticed, because Cape Town is at that sort of urban, has an urban component associated with it. You cannot only look at it from an academic perspective, to just sort of help inform policies around how we have water usage in the Greater Cape Town area, for instance. Oftentimes, we set up these policies, but how it's affecting the communities in that area is actually completely disconnected from the intentions that the policies ultimately had. So we're in a space now where we're starting to actually start evaluating what the importance are of how policy development is happening, and actually ensuring that the engagement of the community is actually considered as policies are being developed. So yeah, that's how I would find that.
So you have had quite success engaging with communities in the development of policy so far. It has its challenges. All right, thank you very much. Let's switch to online again. Prof. Albert Chakona, you are in the aquatic sciences and mostly focus on fish and taxonomy. Can you explain to us how the underexplored freshwater fish species that you work on supports the conservation efforts that are relevant to our communities in South Africa and our natural heritage? How do you ensure that your findings are translated into the actionable policy and community-driven conservation programs of South Africa?
Thanks, Marliese. I'll start by saying, taxonomy is the foundation of everything. I'm tempted to stretch it and say, without taxonomy, humanity is doomed. Because you cannot protect and manage, that which you don't know exists. If I give examples of, typical examples of the setting of the bag limits, for people that do recreational angling, or the WWF, the SASI initiative, all this is based on, correct identification of the species for you to be able to, to come up with those, policies and regulations. So you really need to know what you're dealing with. You need to be able to identify, the species correctly. And in terms of making sure that the work that we do finds its way into policy development and uptake by the relevant authorities, we use the approach that has already been alluded to by the previous presenters, co-creation. So we work very closely from the inception of the projects that we do with all the relevant government departments. We work closely with DFFE, we work with SANBI, WRC, we work with members of the academia industry, and interested, members of the public. So this ensures that the work that we do actually addresses pertinent and relevant questions, that is informed by all these collaborators that we work with. So the information that we generate feeds into IUC and red list assessments, feed into the designation of key biodiversity areas, a designation of national freshwater ecosystem priority areas, MPAs, and informs fisheries management. But the core the uptake of the information is to ensure that we work closely with all the relevant partners right from the inception of the projects, rather than inviting people when you are at the recommendation stage. So yeah, I think I'll leave it there. I think the one point that I want to mention, which also Sue mentioned, is that at the end of the day, the work that we do has to inform or has to have relevance on society. It's not, I think, gone are the days when we just used to do research for the sake of, publishing papers. It needs to be translated back to societal impact. So yeah, thank you, Marliese. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Albert. Any questions from the online audience or in person? Albert, if I may, do you have an example of a Science for the Society project that was successful that you've participated in?
Yeah, I'll give you one project that we recently completed at the NRF-SAEON, where we worked with the aquaculture community, the tilapia aquaculture community, the conservation authorities, researchers from a number of universities across the country, where we were mapping the distribution of Oreochromis niloticus and Oreochromis mozambicus in the Limpopo, Mpumalanga, and KZN provinces. So the information that we've gathered, really, which is the most comprehensive data set of the distribution of these species, is now being used by DFFE and SANBI to identify areas where certain activities, for example, aquaculture, development of aquaculture using the introduced or the non-native Nile tilapia, can be allowed to proceed, but also areas that really need to be actively protected to preserve the genetic integrity of the native Oreochromis mozambicus. So this is one very typical example where we saw, the coming together of all the different sectors to generate information that can allow conservation of biodiversity, but also ensuring that economic development, in the case of aquaculture development, can also be allowed for societal benefit. Thank you.
Thank you, Albert. Questions or input from the audience?
Thank you, Albert, for your interesting insights on the work you're doing. One other aspect that we've been discussing in another project was involving society and other maybe stakeholders in the core design of whatever work that needs to be rolled out to address any societal challenge. But I want to find out what's your take from your experience in ensuring in the core design, different expectations are managed, because people coming in, we've got the scientists, of course, like you're saying, there's that obsession, or we are into the science. Then we've got technocrats that are coming in the core design, we've got society that are coming in. How do you envision a scenario that can work for all? Because people come in with different expectations from whatever is being put on the table. I don't know if that, well, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That's not a very easy question, I must admit. But I think what we've learned from this tilapia project that I've mentioned, as you may be aware, some of these introduced species are considered to be conflict species. So these are species where they've got considerable economic benefit, but also have got major impacts on the environment. So transparency and really discussing right from the outset, and preparedness, from the researcher's perspective, that you can get an idea that comes from the stakeholders that can also, require you to change your position and compromise, if I may use that for lack of a better word. So for this project, we had several meetings where we would give feedback to the stakeholders and then get feedback and input. Sometimes we had to go back to the field to collect or sample in areas where one particular stakeholder would say, why is it that you have a gap in that area? I know that that particular species occurs there. So it's not, so it's also a process of building trust, and it takes time to get to that stage. But we're pleased with the approach that we used for this particular project, where everyone came to the party. All the information was shared transparently. The data that we got was shared transparently. And I think at the end, when we got to the point where we concluded the project, all the parties were really on the same plane. So it really takes a lot of effort and also willingness to shift positions from either side, especially when you're dealing with cases like this one of the conflict species. Thank you. And I hope it addresses the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Albert. So time is something that we all really need. So I will quickly jump to Prof. Francois. How does your research influence policy recommendations for local government and communities to enhance the resilience against climate variability?
Yes, I think that's been a big question in our community for many years. And I can just mention that the Global Change Institute, in fact, specializes in trying to convert science into uptake and policy. So our work is transdisciplinary. And that means the definition of that is that we value forms of knowledge that exist outside of the university. So non-traditional knowledge. This I've learned over the last few years working with the social scientists in the institute. So what it means is that, to explain a bit how this works, you need to build long-term relationships of trust with the stakeholders. In this case, with the municipalities. So you gave us a wonderful demonstration in the keynote of how this can work. In our case, I think the best example is our work within the city of Johannesburg, where specifically Professor Colleen Bogle has basically become a part of the city. She meets with the city about every 2 weeks, sometimes at the city, sometimes the city comes to us. Lots of work with Johannesburg Water, with the disaster managers, with the larger group of colleagues tasked with climate change and the city. And then over time, one first learns, one first listens, and one quickly learns that the city has so many other things to think about than climate change. Many of you will know about the gas explosions in Johannesburg last year. Buildings, hijacked buildings that caught fire. Fire in the townships. Plastic waste pollution, crime. And then you come to the city, now you want to talk about climate change. That takes time. That takes time to develop with the city a joint understanding that climate change is actually also a real problem that is also impacting on people's lives. It multiplies existing stresses, but it can also bring unprecedented risks. And that's maybe where our institute is doing a lot of work, as some of you will know, in terms of tipping points and specifically unprecedented droughts of the near future or hopefully mid-future, impacting on the city at a scale never seen before. So in terms of successes, I would say we played a big role in the city's formal adaptation plan that was accepted about 2 years ago, specifically in the context of heat and health, heat impacting on people in the informal settlements, building heat health plans, and most recently, working climate change into the disaster management plan of the city. So there's much work to be done. Of course, we can only claim a small part of the credit. There are really excellent managers in the city that are trying to. Becoming more climate resilient in the city. So yeah, much to do across South Africa's municipalities. I don't have to remind this community of what we've learned from the Cape Town drought. Many positive lessons from the city of Cape Town, how they handled it. And city of eThekwini, I think currently, is working very hard to try and prevent a next Durban flood because the modeling says it's coming. So enormous responsibilities, colleagues, on all our shoulders, also in terms of working in our local governments and municipalities.
Thank you, Prof. Francois. Anyone from the floor online that have questions or input?
Thank you very much. So the pressing question that I have, where do you as academics get the time to still get involved in the outside things?
No, we don't know where we find it. We are not sure. But magically we find some time here and then. I think we should really commend the colleagues that are working specifically on the social dimensions of climate change. That's a growing field. These are colleagues that are really devoting their lives in terms of their careers, I should say, in terms of the translation of science into messages of uptake. But then working with the stakeholders towards the implementation of the science. So I think it requires a great deal of dedication. I think we are all increasingly aware of the fact that in our specific field, the uptake of the science is critical, and that the time is now, because the unprecedented events are starting to manifest across the world, and we still have a chance of avoiding the 2 degrees Celsius threshold. So now is the time to interact with those who can really turn the tide and slow down global warming and prepare for what's coming. Just say one more final comment. We are in quite a privileged position in Africa, at least in Southern Africa. The governments are all climate aware. There's no there's a willingness to listen to the scientists within the South African government. Our institute works in Malawi, Botswana, Zambia, Namibia, Mozambique, Madagascar. Most of those countries, maybe not all, but most of them have a real willingness to listen to climate science. It's different to the United States, for example, where there's this huge debate around. It's supposed to be a debate, but there are all these conspiracy theories that went around recently as a demonstration of what I'm saying, that the government sent those hurricanes to Florida, right, to influence. So we don't have that type of denialism in the Southern African governments. So that gives us a chance to also work at the highest level of government. Yeah, I mean, in our countries, maybe the biggest risk is the capacity. I mean, the biggest issue is the capacity to respond. There's a willingness by the developing economies across the world, not only in Africa, just don't have the capacity to respond to these increasing climate change risks. So much to do in our community, also in SASAS. I don't think we know all the answers, but I think at least we know what some of the big questions are.
Thank you. There's time for one more question.
Thanks. Are there any consideration for the private sector? Because if you look at government, they've realized recently that including the private sector into all of their plans and development is what's going to get us out of many of our troubles. And obviously, private sector is going to be impacted by climate change, and that will affect the communities. So, yeah.
Yeah, the private sector is very important. I think it's very positive that the big banks in South Africa, for a start, are all coming to the party. And maybe to some extent because of their own interests, they are increasingly being impacted by climate change, field extreme events. And also in terms of certain types of investment portfolios, they have to become green in what they offer to their clients. They've become very climate aware. And they certainly have a role to play in South Africa's just transition out of coal to renewables. And also in terms of help to safeguard South Africa against extreme events. So really positive development, specifically in the financial sector. I think more generally that the private sector really needs to do this hand in hand with government. It should be a partnership. Now, National Treasury is also very, very much a player nowadays, looking at trying to see how South Africa's macro-scale economy will be impacted by climate change. And also via the Reserve Bank, there's a strong awareness of climate change being a real risk now in terms of economic development in South Africa. All of this is positive. I think the government really needs to enable the private sector to do more. For example, the private sector on its own, I think, cannot drive a transition towards electric cars in South Africa. There must be a national policy that says we are moving towards an infrastructure that can support electric cars across the country, given that we drive so much in this country. So certain things need a partnership between government and the private sector. I hope we will see momentum being built along those lines as well in the very near future, in the next few years. South Africa must announce its own nationally determined contributions, its own commitments to fossil fuel reductions, effective emission reductions by next year, I think April. So that's going to be interesting to see to what extent they've spoken to the big companies, Sasol for a start, to what extent the larger agricultural sector is on board. That's going to be a real test for your question in terms of to what extent the private sector is on board with the government's efforts.
Sorry, Marliese, can I chip in with an added comment to Francois'?
Me first? Oh, okay, yeah. Thank you, Professor Francois. Yeah, I just want to add that, like, for example, for the German research in Gerwig, so I work at the Climate Service Center in Germany. Actually, the German Development Bank approached us and developed these climate fact sheets together. So we did the co-production and co-development process because they want to find out which areas are going to be affected by climate change. So I think that's really a good way forward to involve the financial sector. And I just wanted to actually ask another question. Well, how do you find the time? But how do you find the balance actually? Since we are like scientists and we wanted to publish papers also, we need to be, there's a demand for us to publish scientific papers, but at the same time, we need our science to be understood by our stakeholders. So how do you find the balance for this demand for scientific output as well as the same time to make our science understandable?
Thanks, Amel. Yeah, I think the German Climate Services Center has been a lead institute in the world in this respect of changing science into services. So you've also been a good example for us in South Africa in terms of how to do this type of work. But I've been told that we must be heading towards closure of the session now. So your last question, I'll just answer really briefly and say, we can never lose the scientific foundation of our work. In the end, the confidence that there is in our science and in our ability to influence decisions is in the core fundamental science that we do. So the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is a good example of that, where the assessments are always underpinned by scientific facts and only by scientific facts. So that core we can never lose. That credibility we may never lose. So from that basis, we need to interact with stakeholders. I think many colleagues in the room are doing that. I think finding the balance in time is very, very challenging for all of us in South Africa. Maybe I can say in Africa, because there are simply too few of us. There are simply too few climate scientists working in the region. So that the workload is tremendous. The last thing I'll say is, young scientists and students in the room, focus on your studies. Enjoy this time of doing... Enjoy this time of working on the foundations. That's important time.
I would like to say thank you to the panelists and to the audience. It seems like it's very important to plan for impact, be open to interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary collaborations and partnerships. You need time, a lot of time, apparently, it's true. And be open to communication. Communicate with the people you want to work with. Don't be scared. Talk to the colleagues, talk to the senior people here that have experience. If you want advice, don't be shy. And be open to harness diversity, just as Sue said. That's really, really important, especially when you work with communities. If you want to communicate your research, your findings, and make impact, or let it accumulate to impact. And lastly, you cannot do any of this if you do not care about impact and about what you are doing. And then right before we end the session off, Mary Jane, you wanted to do a short announcement.
Thank you, Marliese. So the announcement is really regarding ISHMO, the International Conference on Southern Hemisphere Meteorology and Oceanography. It will be running from 31 March to 4 April. We are still open for abstracts. So the deadline for abstract submission is 20 November, and the deadline for early bird registration is 30 November. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Apparently, Henu also has a surprise. So, Henu.
Thank you. Thanks to SAEON and SAIAB, did I say correct? South African Institute for Biodiversity, for really supporting SASAS this year, providing us with a sponsorship as well. It really went a long way. I want to say thank you to Koji, Mary Jane, Lucky, online. We've been in communication throughout. Can you please come to the front, Koji? People behind the scenes. And then just for all our panel members, a little gift of thank you. And to Koji and Marliese as well. Oh, and Sue, sorry, Sue. Our other keynote as well. And then we'll continue with the next session. Prof. Francois Engelbrech will be the chair. And I can ask, make sure, Jeremy to come to the front so long. Okay. And then finally, I just want to tell the online guests that we're going to end the online session now, but thank you for your participation and attendance. Koji, I saw we had about 60 attendance online, which we were very happy about. Thanks everyone.